All right, let's talk money. This is where the rubber really meets the road. It's about making smart choices and prioritizing needs and avoiding the dreaded gear acquisition syndrome, or gas. Nobody needs bad gas. By the end of this lesson, you'll be able to create a prioritized 12-month purchasing plan for audio and lighting equipment. No more aimless spending. We're building a roadmap to upgrade your business's sound and lights strategically. So let's get right to that. All right, so jumping right in here. First thing we want to do is assess your current inventory and identify those critical gaps. All right, so you should have already completed the current gear inventory in lesson 1. And of course, if you did not do that, you can come right over here to the Profit with Production Resources spreadsheet and find the current gear inventory list there. And you can go on and put everything you own down in here. After that, we're going to come over to the minimum viable rig. So what is the minimum viable rig? Well, this is what I think is the least amount of gear you can own to be able to run a small and medium scale production business alongside your current music offerings. Within the minimum viable rig, essentially what I've done here is taken the complete gear list that we just looked at in the last 2 lessons, and I have duplicated that out and then come in here and put in this column D here. If you need to buy stuff, that column is got this little need to buy label in there. If you already own it, you can go ahead and toggle that on to already own, and you'll see it will zero out the number there. And then you'll see as you scroll down here, I've crossed off items that I don't think are completely essential for the first time you're building out your rig and when you're just getting started with this. We're going to go through each of the items on the list here, and I'm going to explain why I think all the items I've put on this list need to be on here. And as we're doing that, you can follow along in your own sheet and tick off things that you already own so that when we're done, you'll have a number down here at the bottom that equals the amount you're going to need to spend in order to purchase the remaining stuff you need to put together your own minimum viable rig. Okay, so as you can see over here on the complete list, the complete gear list and buy links, we had a total of roughly $37,000 worth of equipment. That is what my company currently owns to be able to offer a few different speaker setups and a few different band rigs and that sort of thing. So the minimum viable rig here, let's talk about what is included in here a little bit. So what we're getting is a front of house PA suitable for crowds up to about 300 people. We're getting a mixing console, cables, microphones, stands for up to about 10 musicians. That includes your rhythm section, a few horns, and a few vocalists. Obviously, if you're doing bands that are much smaller or much bigger than that, you may need to up the numbers in this sheet a little bit. And then, of course, we're getting some lighting, a little bit of lighting for the stage, one effects light for the dance floor. So a very minimal lighting setup, but you do need some lighting there. And that's about it. So let's zoom out here and go over this list. So first of all, right off the top, do we need a mixer? Absolutely. I'm recommending still the 24R PreSonus console. Of course, you need an iPad to be able to control that mixer. You need your router to be able to have the iPad control the mixer. And of course, you have to plug the router in. So all of this stuff is essential. It is on our need to buy list. As I scroll down into speakers and monitors here, you'll see I've crossed off the 2 battery powered options that we had at the top here. Those are great for, outdoor events, ceremonies, weddings, cocktails, that sort of thing. However, not completely essential to get started. I didn't own these myself until about year 8 or so doing stuff. So you can probably get away without these for a while. They were just a quality of life purchase for me. I was getting tired of going to the store to rent them all the time, and we were using them more and more. So I did find it necessary to pick them up eventually, but they're definitely rentable. You don't need to own those right away. Same thing with the Electro Voice EV50 column speaker. That is technically more of a secondary front of house system in my rig. So if I have maybe 2 bands out on the same night, I can send this set of speakers as mains for one of my events, and I can use my line array system at a different event. Obviously, the smaller event is going to get these speakers because these are a smaller speaker. Unfortunately, I don't think you can rent these really anywhere, but most rental places do kind of have a column speaker similar to this one you might be able to get away with. So do bear that in mind. The first thing I'm going to recommend here on the speaker list is absolutely without a doubt our Yorkville powered line array speakers. I'm going to just zoom this in a little bit so we can look at this columns better. So absolutely, I recommend these. They're just such a versatile speaker. Like I said, you can double them up if you need more power. And of course, you can turn any speaker down as low as you need it to go. So that's not really an issue. So they're just a great all-round speaker. And of course, you want to pair that with the PS15 subwoofer as well. So two of those on the need to buy list. Sorry, two of each of those on the need to buy list. Next are Yorkville NX10C monitors. I definitely would recommend you have some of those. Not all the bands you work for are going to have in-ear monitors. Maybe you don't even have them yet in your band. So definitely need some floor monitors. You may need to adjust this number depending on how many people need them. Bear in mind, some people may be able to share. Sometimes in my band, if it's a small enough gig, I can get away with giving my horn section one monitor. I can get away with maybe having the drummer and the bassist share one, or maybe the guitarist and the keyboard can share one. Most people don't love that, so maybe consider upgrading with time if you decide you're going to start with that strategy. But definitely probably want at least 4 of those to start. And then of course we need the subwoofer poles here. These allow you to mount line array tops on top of these subs. So no question you're going to need that. I have crossed off the wireless in-ear system. These are quite expensive. And if you're not sure you want to be using in-ears, again, you probably don't need those. It's a little cheaper to get started with floor monitors if you're unsure of going the in-ear route. Of course, we do have the cheaper alternative there as well, which are actually a little cheaper than floor monitors if you did want to give those a try. Again, your musicians will need to have their own earbuds though, so that is another expense to think about. I've crossed that off for my minimum viable rig. But I do have the wired in-ear body packs on here. I do like to have 4 of these in the rig regardless. You just never know when you're going to lose a monitor at the last minute, or if somebody just prefers that. These are just such a cheap item, like compared to the price of a monitor here, which is almost $500. You can get these at $33. They just seem like a no-brainer to have in your rig for whatever situation may arise. Moving on to microphones and cables here. Absolutely, I would recommend you get a wireless microphone, at least one of them. You're going to need that for if you do any kind of speeches throughout the event, maybe an officiant if you're at a wedding. Quite often MCs want to move around the room as they're talking. With a wired mic, they're very limited. You might be able to get away with renting this for a little while. It is a bit more of an expensive microphone option, obviously, but quality of life, I would say just get that into your rig as soon as you can. You will use it a lot. Next on the list here, we've got wired microphones. So this is the same version, or basically the same type of microphone. You've got a 58 capsule on the wireless one here, and these are 58 capsules on the wired ones. So bombshell microphone, you're not going to be able to beat this anywhere. They're just the industry standard for everything. You absolutely need to have them in your rig. These will cover all of your vocals. They work fine for instruments even. And of course the SM57 microphone as well. I've recommended 6 of the 58s and 4 of the 57s. You could probably get away with just 10 of the 58s if you wanted, to be honest. The 57 and the 58 actually have the same capsule in them. It's just a different pop screen on top. So if you take off that pop screen on top of a 58 microphone, I'll just go and show you this here. If you basically unscrew this little metal mesh ball at the top, you end up getting what is this microphone right down here. I mean, it looks a little bit different when you unscrew the top, but it's the same thing inside. So they have very similar, or pretty much exactly the same responses, pretty much exactly the same microphone. So you can mix and match those as needed, but having 10 of them in your rig is probably the minimum you'd want to get away with. All right, next, our drum mic kit. You absolutely need to be able to mic your drums, so you want to put that on there. We've got mic stands as well on here. You get this 6-pack that I'm recommending. You're going to need 2 of those 6-packs. So this is 12 mic stands in total. You're going to want to have microphones on your drum set as overheads. So you need a couple mic stands to put those up. And then of course you've got your vocal microphones, any horn microphones, possibly you're miking a amplifier as well. So you need to have mic stands for that. You can never really have enough mic stands. So always bring a couple more extras to every gig. Even if you think you only need 5, budget for 7 and bring them along, because they will also, they have a lot of moving parts on microphones and they tend to break. So if that happens on a gig, you want to have a spare kicking around. Of course, your kick mic stand as well. You want to be able to mount that kick mic in front of the kick drum. Your 8-channel snake, you could probably get away without this, but in the minimum viable rig, we're trying to keep our setup time as low as possible, and this really, really helps with that. Once again, this is going to be used for miking up your drum kit and making that process a lot faster than having to run 8 individual microphone cables from your mixer all the way to your drum set. Microphone cables, all right, you need a ton of these. You're going to need at least one cable for every input on your mixer, and probably for every output as well. On the PreSonus 24R, we have 24 inputs, we have 12 outputs for auxiliaries, and we have 2 main outputs. That already gets us up and above 30, and then if you've got any spares you need, maybe you're linking light fixtures together, that sort of thing, 40 is really kind of the bare minimum I'd want to go with here. As for 50 footers, once again, those are for the really long runs, connecting to the furthest away main speaker from your mixing setup, possibly connecting lights as well. Really helps to have a couple really long cables in the rig. And then of course some patch cords, doesn't hurt to have those. I've crossed off the 100-foot XLRs here. These are super handy for outdoor events where you're running fill speakers at great distances from each other. But for the minimum viable rig, you can probably get away without these and just rent them as you need. And on that note, actually, it may be hard to rent these. I find a lot of rental stores do not supply 100-foot XLRs in their rental department. So if that is something you do want to have for whatever reason, owning those may be your only option. Right, our 1/4-inch TRS male to XLR male adapters. Those are for being able to patch into your mixing console. You're going to need 12 of those, one for each auxiliary output on the back of the PreSonus 24R. We definitely need cable ties because you do not want cable spaghetti, and we've got some DI boxes in there. I recommend 4. You're probably going to need at least 2 for the keyboard, a right and a left channel, and if they have 2 keyboards, maybe you need a right and a left for each keyboard. Sometimes guitarists will use these days if they're using a pedal board and they want to just DI straight from the pedal board. Maybe a bass player needs one of these, so be aware of the instrumentation you're working with. You may need more than 4, but 4 is a pretty standard number that I have been comfortable using in my rig for a long time. Right, lighting down here. Absolutely need some stage wash lighting. I'm recommending once again the Yorkville LED 4 stage wash lights, and you need 2 of those, one on either side of the stage up on their light stands, which are these guys right here. So I'm including those. We've got a bag to transport those lights in, very important, and we've got that replacement upper shaft to replace the upper shaft in the light stands that you're going to purchase here so that they fit these light fixtures. And we're going to include one little effects light for our dance floor to kind of spruce things up a little bit. I have taken out the moving headlights. Those are not really necessary for the minimum viable rig here. Neither is our very high-tech focus spotlight with the focus spot with the moving head in there. Neither are the up lights. Those can be rented on a gig by gig basis, and neither is the haze machine. So those have all been taken out of the minimum viable rig. As for power down here, so we have power distribution system, absolutely need that. That's going to sit right at the top of your rack and distribute power throughout your system to your mixing console, your wireless devices that are built in there, and everything else that sits inside your rack. Absolutely need that. Power cords, yes, a couple of 25 footers and a couple of 25 footers with the outlets at the end. This one is the one with the outlets spaced throughout the cable like that. So this would be your stage power, I would say, and this would be your power getting from the outlets on or circuits wherever they are and the venue to the stage. So 2 different necessities there. And in case your stage happens to be very far away from the venue's power outlets, a 50-foot extension cord is what you would want to use in that case, and so I'd have a couple of those in the rig as well. These little converters, they're so cheap, I consider them essential. They really help you keep that stage clean if you're plugging in monitors anywhere and then you want to tap into the back of those monitors to get their power out and use it somewhere else as well. Super helpful. You'll never regret having those in the case. IEC cables, 25 footers. These are completely essential for getting to all of your powered equipment, whether those be speakers, lighting fixtures, monitors, what have you. Never hurts to have some extra long ones. Even though your gear probably ships with them, they might not be that long, and it's really helpful to have that kind of length when you're working on big stages. 12-foot long power strip with surge protector, that's just your power bars. You definitely need some of those. Since we don't have a ton of wireless equipment in this rig, I'm not recommending you get a ton of batteries, but one of these chargers, you'll definitely grow into it. So go ahead and get that. And then of course, get some AA batteries as well. I've got a 24 pack recommended there. And then of course you need something to store those batteries in. So go ahead and pick yourself up some storage cases for those. I have removed the AAA batteries from my list here because those I find just not super essential, and none of the gear I've recommended on this list actually requires those AAA batteries. So you're good without those for now. Cases and storage. All right, you're absolutely going to need some kind of rack mount to store your mixer in, your wireless microphone, your drawer with all of the equipment, all of your microphones and things, which may be, this is the drawer I'm talking about here. So this is the rack case you're going to need to store your drawer in and your mixer and everything else. So those two items are on there. We've got the Rubbermaid totes as well to store all of your cables. Absolutely need those. And then the Gator speaker stand bag to store your speaker stands. I have removed the label maker. It's not completely necessary. Might save your sanity a little bit though. So if your sanity is worth $50, you may want to go and add that back to the list for yourself. As for outdoor event requirements, once again, the minimum viable rig is not something we're really considering for outdoor events. So I've taken all of that stuff off. The pop-up tent, the waterproof speaker covers, cable stand covers, that sort of things. Your leveling shims, the light duty cable covers, all of that stuff has been removed from the minimum viable rig. But transportation, we definitely do need. You need that rock and roller cart, in my opinion. If you're hand bombing all of these things in and out of your venue, you're going to add an extra hour of load-in time. And easily over a few gigs, this cart is going to pay for itself. So make sure you grab one of those, and that's about it. Of course, you do need some kind of vehicle to move this stuff around, but hopefully you have something in that department or you're thinking about it. For me, the reason I kind of slashed this off here is because I didn't really think about it as an expense with the rest of this gear, because I ended up purchasing that Toyota Sienna that I'm recommending here. And it's my personal automobile as well, right? So I drive it to all my gigs, regardless of whether or not I'm providing any sound equipment there. I do my grocery shopping with it. I go on my holidays in it. So it's not really an expense that I think of when I'm thinking about my production services as a whole necessarily, because it's just a life expense. I needed it in my life anyway. Regardless of whether or not I'm doing sound, I still need to get myself to gigs, so I needed some kind of car. I had a car previous to this van that I ended up selling to upgrade to the van and get a little more space. And I actually, those cars were relatively the same in price. So not a huge difference here. You probably already have a car in your life if you're a pro musician already. So maybe you need to think about upgrading that to some kind of a van to haul all of this stuff. But essentially at the end of the day, it's not going to really move the needle on the price of all of this stuff. Hopefully. So that is the minimum viable rig. I hope that makes sense. As you can see here, we're looking at about $18,000 worth of equipment if you're going to buy all this stuff. So what I recommend is you're coming over here to your current gear inventory, checking out what you've got already. If there's stuff you think you might be able to make work, maybe you've already got a whole bunch of mic cables, for example, you could go in here and adjust this number. Maybe we only need 10 microphone cables now. Boom, this number is going to go from 600 down to 150. Etc. Right? So you can go and modify this list. And like I said, of course, if you already own stuff, maybe you already own all these microphones, just switch that over to already own. That removes it from the list here and lets you know what is remaining on here that you need to buy. Okay, so now that we've gone through that whole entire gear list, you know what the minimum viable rig is, you know what you need to own and what you need to prioritize in your next purchases. Now, just as a sidebar here, when I started offering production services with my band, I realized our 16-channel mixer was just not big enough. We also had a DMX light setup that was really, really complicated, way too complicated for our higher technicians to figure out. And in the end, we had to upgrade our mixing console and swap out our lighting rig for something that was easy enough for techs to set up and figure out on the fly. So bear that in mind as you're going through this list as well. Maybe you do own a whole bunch of gear already, but you're comparing it to this minimum viable rig and thinking, I wonder if what I own is the right stuff. Maybe it is. I'm not saying the minimum viable rig is like the one thing in the world that is going to work and everything else will fail. Absolutely not. You can use your creative problem solving and figure out stuff that will work in place of whatever is on there. But do ask yourself that question. Is what I have going to be too complicated for people to figure out on the fly? Is it not up to the right quality standards? Whatever the case may be, it may be worth getting rid of some of that old stuff you own and upgrading it to more quality equipment that you know is going to last and be easier to use. So bear that in mind. All right, next I want to talk about budgeting strategies. So we've got lots of options in terms of how to acquire all of this equipment. First of all, there's the rent versus own. I'm going to go into a little more detail on that in the next slide here. But when you're renting to own, many music stores actually allow you to rent first and then apply a portion of that rental to your final purchase price. Ask if that's an option when you go in to rent stuff. There's a good chance you want to rent it out before you buy it just to try it anyway. And sometimes if you decide you want to buy that later, they'll say, okay, maybe you've spent $500 renting this thing. We're going to give you a $150 credit towards the actual purchase price. So it's never going to be all of that rental getting applied to the purchase price, but bear in mind that that is possibly an option for you. Another thing I will say here is rent for months, not days. Okay, you might pay the same price to rent a single piece of gear for like 4 individual days as you would for an entire month. We're going to go into setting your rental prices in a future lesson here, but bear this in mind. I know for my local music store, if I go and rent, let's say a mixer on a Friday night, they're going to charge me $50 for that mixer, right? If I return that on Saturday and then I go back and I rent it the next Friday, it's another $50. And then the next Friday, another $50, and so on. If I rent that mixer for 4 Saturdays in August, I've now paid $200 to rent that mixer, right? Wrong. I've driven to the music store 8 times to do those rentals. How much did that cost me? Well, my music store is a 1-hour round trip every time I go. That's 8 hours I've spent of my valuable time going to the music store to rent that mixer. Did that mixer cost me $200? No, it cost me $200 in cash plus 8 hours in lost opportunities, right? So bear that in mind. You're wasting a ton of time getting to and from the store. It makes a lot more sense to rent for a longer period. And in most cases, that like the way my music store does their rentals is one rental day is the same. Like if I want to, so there's a 1-day rate, which is say $50. Then there's a 2-day rate, which is now the same as renting it for a week. So I pay $100. I get the rent. It doesn't matter if I return that mixer tomorrow or if I return it a week from now, it's the same price. If I rent it for 3 weeks, that's the same as renting it for 3 days. If I rent it for a whole month, that's the same price as renting it for 4 days. That's how they work out their rental rates. So I know if I need this piece of gear 4 times in a month, it does not make sense for me to return it every week and come back and get it again. And in fact, because of those 8 hours I'm wasting going to and from the store, if I even just needed it 2 or 3 times a month, I would rent that piece of gear for the whole month because financially it would make more sense, right? So bear that in mind when you're going to rent stuff. Financing. All right. Many music stores offer better financing than credit cards do. Some as low as 0% for just the first few months. So of course, credit cards are an option too, but generally they're going to ding you that percentage right away. And it starts around 19 to 20%. So that's pretty high. On the note of sort of credit financing as well, if you are a registered business and you're able to go to your bank and set up a business loan, sometimes you can get your interest rates down to as low as 9 or 10%, which is half of a credit card. So that might help you out here as well. Next big thing, wait for sales. Okay, Black Friday, holiday sales, etc. Know your local music store. Ask if they do an annual sale. Mine does this incredible attic sale every year where just for 1 day, they liquidate tons of their rental stock. And I've managed to purchase almost all of my line array speakers, my subwoofers, all my other really expensive stuff on these sale days and save 40 to 50% off the retail price. So that's huge when you're buying $5,000 worth of speakers to get them for $2,500. It's like, man, that's a lot of savings. So do not blow over this one. Do some research, find out when you can get those sales and go take advantage. Next thing is to set a realistic budget. Okay, so how much can you realistically afford to spend over the next 12 months? And be conservative with this, right? Like if you realize here setting up your minimum viable rig shopping list that you're going to need to spend $18,000 to buy all this equipment, that's roughly $1,500 a month if you spread this over 12 months, right? So do you want to put that all on a credit card today and just pay interest for 12 months? Or do you want to just go back to the music store every month? You know, if you're comfortable spending that $1,500 a month, go back to the music store. Maybe this month you get your rock and roller cart and all of these items and maybe a few of these items and just add it up to $1,500 each month. You've got your shopping list. You can do that. But don't overspend, right? If you feel like maybe within your means right now, you're only able to afford $1,000 a month, maybe you need to stretch this out a little longer. Rent the other stuff in the interim and eventually purchase it when you know the finances are there and you're comfortable doing that. Last thing, obviously, prioritize your needs, right? Focus on the gear that will have the biggest impact on your sound and lighting. For me, that was like speakers and subwoofers at first, because I knew when I went to the music store to rent stuff, they didn't always have those speakers. They were kind of sought after items. Other people would rent them, and then I'd show up for my gig and realize that I was just getting the last crappy speaker that they had. And now I'm working with a speaker I've never worked with before on this gig, and I don't know what it sounds like, and I don't really know what I'm dealing with, and that's not the quality I promised my client, so I feel bad about that, and I'm also now a little anxious walking into a gig with a piece of gear I've just met for the first time, right? So for me, it was a quality of life thing to get those big speakers first, my line arrays and my subwoofers, and just have those. Microphones are pretty easy to get. So, I mean, if you're going to a music store, they're all going to have those SM58 microphones. So, maybe you can get away without owning those for a little while. But think about what things are going to kind of bring you the most quality of life to own, and what are just going to kind of take that stress out of this business for you, because that is definitely worth something as well. All right, let's talk a little bit more about renting versus buying. So when you're renting, obviously the costs up front can be a lot lower, but you don't own that equipment. When you're buying, the upfront costs, of course, are higher, but you own that equipment and you're actually building equity in your business, which means this isn't really an expense at the end of the day. It's more of an investment. So we'll talk about that more in a bit. But when to rent, okay, if you're not sure you want all that equipment long-term, maybe you're just trying out a new speaker or a new microphone and you're not sure you want to own it, obviously rent it. That makes the most sense in those cases. If you want to avoid the hassle of maintenance and repairs as well, rental companies are taking care of that maintenance on their end, so you don't typically have to do that. That said, if you damage a speaker when it's out on the gig, they probably still will require you to pay for that. And in my experience, that's what happens most of the time, right? I've never had speakers I shouldn't say that. I have had speakers just kind of crap out in the middle of a gig with no real reason. They didn't have any damage prior. They just got old and it happened. And then, of course, I'm stuck with the bill. If that happens on a gig and you're able to say, no, I didn't drop this speaker, I didn't run over it with my car, nothing happened to it, I just plugged it in and it didn't work, there's a good chance the rental company is not going to give you a hard time about that, and they're going to be covering that cost. So that is one perk. Of course, if you prefer to have the latest and greatest gear, sometimes it makes sense to rent as well, because you're just taking that gear back at the end of the gig. Next time you show up to rent something, if they've got an update, you're going to get that update, right? So you don't have to sell off the old stuff and buy the new stuff. So there is a little bit of a perk there. That said, I will say in basically everything we're working with in this rig, speakers, microphones, rock and roller cart, none of that's changed in like the last 10 years, right? Once you've got a good sounding audio equipment, or audio rig rather, it sounds good. Like there's nothing really more you need to do with that. These line array systems spread the sound beautifully around the space. I mean, until we telepathically communicate sound waves to each other or something like that, I don't see live sound systems changing that much. So really kind of wanting that sort of latest and greatest gear, if that's in your head, get it out of your head. When it comes to speakers and microphones, that stuff doesn't really change. It's just been solid forever. And we're in a pretty good place with that stuff now. So I don't see any big changes coming there. The one thing I would say is maybe in the mixing console world, those do change. They do get updates. The effects get better. But again, the PreSonus console, I've been using it for years. It hasn't changed a lot. They've added some new bells and whistles here and there, but it's just a really rock solid piece of gear. And probably not even going to need to upgrade that very often. When to buy? All right, you'll need this equipment for years to come. Pretty much all this stuff. If you're getting into this for a business from the business perspective that we're trying to get you into, you're going to need this stuff for a long time. You want to build equity in your business. So equity is when you're basically taking cash, hard cash, and turning it into some physical thing that your business now owns, right? If you bought a piece of property for your business, you didn't just have an expense of $100,000 for some property. You now have equity, right? You turn that cash into some physical, tangible thing, and that still sits in your business. So this is the same with equipment. It's not actually an expense per se. You do get to write off a bit of it on your taxes every year, but if you for all this equipment I own tens of thousands of dollars of equipment right now. If I decided to shut down my business tomorrow, I would be able to sell all of that and recoup a lot of what I actually spent on it to begin with. For example, in my case, all of my speakers, my subwoofers, my line array tops, I bought on sale. So although they retail for maybe $2,000 a piece, I only paid $1,200 for them, right? So I got an insane price on them when I started. And now years later, if I decided to sell those, I'd probably be able to sell them at, I don't know, 30 to 40% of the retail price. So a $2,000 speaker, I'm probably going to be able to sell today for $600 maybe. And considering I only spent $1,200 on it, that's pretty good. If I've owned that speaker for 10 years and I'm selling it and I've only really had a cost of $600 to own that speaker over 10 years, I'm basically paying like $70 a year to rent that speaker essentially. So it's just a no-brainer, but you're just not going to beat that kind of a price. So building that equity in your business is really, really key. And of course, if you want to sell your business eventually, the whole thing, somebody actually has something they can buy. They're actually buying all of your gear on top of all of your contacts, on top of your business structure. So that's really valuable. Of course, if you're comfortable with that maintenance and repairs, now I will say all of the gear I'm recommending, I've had incredibly good experiences with. The only reason I'm recommending all this stuff is because it's not likely to break down very often, and it's really reliable gear that I've kind of battle tested, and it's proven itself to me. So the amount that I have to spend on repairs every year is insanely low, and I'm going to show you that in one of our next lessons here when we start talking about return on all of this investment you're making. But it is insanely low, so that should not be scaring you. You understand that most good gear holds its value well. You can always sell equipment later to recoup upfront costs. So like I said, yes, if you are deciding you want to get out of this business and you want to sell off all this equipment, it's not an expense because you're going to be able to recoup a lot of that later. All right, so creating a phased purchasing plan is going to be helpful for you to figure out how you want to buy all this stuff, assuming you don't just have the $18,000 cash sitting around right now to go and buy all this stuff. $18,000 there. So what I would do is prioritize your needs. You know, what is the most important gear to buy first? Again, think of your quality of life here, right? If hauling around speakers and subwoofers is a pain in the butt, the rental store never has the ones you want, that sort of stuff, go for the stuff that's going to make your life easier. And set some timelines, right? When will you make each of these purchases? And tag that along with allocating the funds, right? How much can you spend, or how much will you spend on each item over your timelines, right? Like I said earlier, if you're comfortable with a budget of spending $1,500 a month per se, you can have all this equipment within a year. If you've got a lot more cash to burn and you can spend $10,000 in your first 2 months, no big deal, then you'll have all this stuff in a couple of months, and so on, right? Find something that's comfortable for you. So an example phase purchasing plan I put together here, if this was me doing it all over again, I'd probably buy all this stuff over 5 months to kind of match my cash flow a little bit. Start off in January so I've got everything I need by the summer months when my gig season really kicks in. I'd start off by buying the mixer first, the router, the rack case, setting everything up, getting an iPad. That's going to run me about $2,000. After all that, maybe I'll purchase all my cables and power cords and mics and stands and just have all those little trinkets in the set ready to go. After that, let me get all my speakers and subwoofers in there for another $7,000. So I'm kind of ramping up my expenses every month, $2,000, $4,000, $7,000. And then tapering it off to $2,000 and $3,000 for the last 2 months here when I buy out my monitors and the lighting I need. So there's a little example for you. Take that if it feels comfortable for you. All right, key takeaways from this lesson. So budgeting for gear really is all about making smart choices and prioritizing your needs, right? So go through that current gear inventory you've got and go through our minimum viable rig list, do that comparison. Make sure you're prioritizing the stuff you need. Consider renting that equipment to minimize upfront costs and maximize that flexibility. If maybe you can't find all of the equipment on the minimum viable rig and you're wanting to get alternatives instead, definitely rent those first. Make sure they are going to meet the bar for you. And of course, owning that equipment will build equity in your business. Not so much an expense as it is an investment. So learning activities from this lesson, I want you guys to use that minimum viable rig sheet to determine the gear you will need to acquire. Go through and prioritize that based on your business's needs, budget, and your current available cash. And lastly here, create a little phase purchasing plan for yourself so you know how you're going to buy that gear. I know for me personally, if I don't make lists, things don't happen. So guys, go make that list. Know when you're going to buy that gear. Put it in your calendar. Say, I'm going to the store on this day. I'm going to put the Amazon order on this day, whatever. Make sure you do that so that this stuff happens and you don't forget about it. Last thing you want to be is a week before a gig and realizing your speakers haven't arrived yet and you haven't even ordered them. They're not going to make it there in time for the gig. So don't put yourself in a stressful place like that. All right, so what's next? Well, in the next lesson, Operational Excellence, we'll dive into how to efficiently set up, operate, and troubleshoot all of your new gear. You'll learn how to develop workflows that streamline your new services and ensure consistent quality. So I'll see you there.